Have you ever learned something by accident? For example, if you got a flat tire on the side of the road and there was no one around, you're going to learn how to fix a flat tire very quickly. You may not have intended it, but some things that you learn by accident are very good. I've learned many things in my life by accident. I've been here for 6.5 years, and I've learned a lot by accident about maintenance, electricity, sprinkler systems, renovations, lighting, tents, hall rentals, festivals, city bylaws, roofs, air conditioning, and of course heating, and a few other incidentals that I picked up purely by accident. All these topics have one thing in common. Everything done well actually has a process. Things don't just happen by themselves. If we are to do things well, there are always several stages that need to be followed, and they need to be followed in a particular order. Planning, budgeting, preparation always take place before the actual work. For example, before we painted the walls, we had to replace some of the rotting wood. Then we had to plaster, fill in the cracks, sand, put on some primer, and only then could we paint. Pretty long process, right? And if we paint before we do all these things in that order, the paint job would actually not last very long. So understanding stages and order is important for everything we do in life, from painting and maintenance to things that are more important, like our spiritual life. We often overlook just how systematic Jesus was in his teachings. Jesus rarely helps someone instantaneously or automatically. Most often, Jesus starts with a dialogue to prepare the heart before healing the body. For example, in today's gospel, there are at least 9 stages that take place. First, the sick boy saw the apostles who could not heal him. Then the father of the boy brought him to Jesus. Third, when the boy fell to the ground, Jesus asks the father publicly, "How long has he had this?" And then the father responds, "From childhood." Then the father says, "If you can do anything, have pity on us and help us." And then Jesus says, "If you can, all things are possible to him who believes." Sixth, immediately the father of the child cries out and says, "I believe, help my unbelief." And then Jesus says, "You mute and dumb spirit, deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." Then Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him up, and he arose. And then finally, when the apostles asked Jesus why they were not able to heal the boy, Jesus answers, "This kind can only be driven out by prayer and fasting." Jesus, of course, could have healed the boy immediately, but he preferred to show everyone that true and lasting healing requires several stages. There are some highlights in the stages that we read about in today's gospel. Number 1, when Jesus asks his father, "How long has he had this?" and the father says, "From childbirth," Jesus reminds the father, he reminds the boy, and he reminds everyone around that this was a serious sickness that the boy has had all his life. Jesus also points out that the sickness was so serious that not even the disciples could heal him. So Jesus makes sure that everyone sees and acknowledges the problem, and that they see and acknowledge that the problem is a serious one that has gone on for a very long time. Secondly, when the father says, "If you can do anything, have pity on us and help us," Jesus says in a kind of parallel way or copies his words. He says, if you can, of course, Jesus says, all things are possible to him who believes. And the father says, I do believe, help my unbelief. And then Jesus heals the boy when the father publicly affirms his faith. And finally, in this gospel, Jesus reminds everyone, especially the disciples, that growth in our spiritual life is not possible without daily prayer and fasting. It would be ridiculous to paint a wall before following the necessary stages of filling in the cracks and sanding. And today's gospel reminds us that we should not see our spiritual life as being automatic, that we take for granted, that it just happens somehow, somewhere in a mystical way. In order to develop a deep spiritual life and to grow in our faith, today's gospel reminds us that there has to be stages. There have to be small steps that we take every single day. Of course, we take for granted that Lent is a time of increased prayer and fasting. I encourage everyone to think of the stages in today's gospel and the stages we go through when we do anything that ends up working very well. And not only is Lent a time of thinking of these stages, Lent is a time to practice these stages for 40 days and to realize that they are possible, and to also develop stages in our spiritual life throughout the entire year. Last week, we had a great talk given to the youth by Shireen, Eliana, and Marina. It was about fasting. And they gave us homework, a calendar, and some Bible emergency phone numbers. Well, I want to report that I did my homework. They asked us to write in each box something spiritual or a prayer or something that you're going to do every day. So I counted these numbers. They ended up being 26. You can see I actually like order. It ended up being that it started on the 26th, and if I do this every day, I'm going to get right to Easter. So this might seem very basic, but it's so important that if we can't even identify one thing spiritual that we do every day, there's a problem. If we can't write down that we spend at least 5 minutes a day in silence, or we turned off our phone or our TVs for even 5 minutes, or we did not give up something that we could have eaten, then our box would be blank. We would try to be living a growth in the spiritual life with absolutely no stages, no steps along the way. This is a perfect example of thinking not only of our goal, but also thinking of the stages that we need to get to those goals. Our faith cannot be seen as being mechanical. So also we're not filling up the boxes just for the sake of filling them up. But it's also very serious to realize that if there's absolutely nothing we can point to as being real in our life. There are stages, and that's why not only today's gospel, but also the saint that we celebrate or commemorate in the fourth Sunday of Lent is St. John Climacus, or St. John of the Ladder, who was an abbot in the monastery of Mount Sinai. He wrote a famous book called The Ladder, and in it he spoke of stages that are necessary in the spiritual life. And I'll quote only a few. He starts off with the need for silence. You cannot grow in your spiritual life without a few minutes of silence a day. He says, the lover of silence draws close to God. He talks to him in secret, and God enlightens him. Silence, he says, is followed by prayer. Become aware of God in whose presence you are while you pray. Then take a formula of prayer and recite it with perfect attention, both to the words you are saying and to the person to whom you are saying them. And third, he speaks about a renewal of your faith commitment. Those who submit to the Lord with a simple heart will run the good race. If they keep their minds on a leash, they will not draw the wickedness of the demons unto themselves. Silence, prayer, and commitment. We can't commit to something if we don't spend silence focusing on it. If we don't spend time in prayer, then our spiritual life is only a very vague idea. All of us have faith. Today's gospel also reminds us to grow in that faith. In his very beautiful passage, yet sometimes these short passages are very rich, the Father says to Jesus, I believe, help my unbelief. This is the refrain of absolutely every single one of us. We all have faith, and we all have unbelief. We all have lack of faith. But God wants us to take that faith and to grow in that faith, and the only way that's possible is by following stages in our spiritual growth. I believe, Lord, help my unbelief. During these last few years, I've learned many things about landscaping and renovations. But what is more important is that I've learned that to do things well, we need to follow clear stages and not hurry up the process. And that things that get done well are never done by accident, whether it be the things around us or, more importantly, our spiritual life. So I challenge you today to take a calendar, either print one off the internet or use one at home, and fill in the blanks. Write something very practical that you did today to grow in your spiritual life, to get from this stage where you are to a stage that's slightly better, just slightly closer to God. Write what you want to achieve and write the stages you will commit to achieving your spiritual goals. It is only with clear stages that we see lasting results, not only in the things around us, but more importantly, in our spiritual life.